Hey everybody, Poppin' Fresh here. I wanted to give a Season 2 review video, talk about my experiences in the second season of VBL-S now that I am out in the quarterfinals. Better than I thought I'd end up doing, but not as well as I'd hoped I do, but let's just get into it. So, start off talking about Season 2 with the background of kind of how I went into Season 2. So, let's talk about Season 1. So my strategy for picking in Season 1 was value picks. And this worked out pretty well, I think, for the most part. I had a couple standout mons on my team who I ended up bringing to the majority of games. Rillaboom, I picked as my G-Max because it was essentially a free Tier 1 with the way that first draft was structured. Porygon Z was a nuke. Moongus was a one-trick pony with a very good trick, forcing my opponents to always run safety goggles, and if on their mon that didn't run it, get put to sleep, get redirected, all that fun stuff. Ninetales actually put in a lot of work in speed control and Veil, Rhydon in Aromatisse for my Trick Room mode, and on the whole my team was very much offensively focused. I didn't really have good defensive pieces besides Ninetales for screens, Amoonguss for redirection, and those were both mid-season pickups because I realized that I was severely lacking in that area. And this was a good enough team to get me to the semifinals, where I lost to Steve, as I tend to do. But overall, if you look at it, there's not too much synergy per se. It's just kind of solidly individual mons that kind of mash together into a team to make them work. So when you look at that, I decided that I wanted to make a team where I could bring more than just the same 5 or 6 mons and have a couple Tier 3s and Tier 4s that I could actually use and bring that would actually bring something to the table. Like, for example, on this team, I don't even remember who some of my Tier 4s were, besides Magneton. And I had one Tier 4 slot that I traded around twice and never brought either of them. It ended up being Frostmoth. At one point it was Ditto. I think I had a Druddigon at one point. That really didn't do anything, but my team was definitely top-heavy, and not necessarily in a good way. And you can see here from my usual stats, Rillaboom, Porygon, and Rhydon were way stacked up at the top. And then if you were to look at this proportionally for how many weeks I had them versus how many times I brought them, Amoonguss and Ninetales would have been right up there as well, because I picked them up at week 7 right here. But for only being around for less than half the season, they showed up half as often as Rillaboom. So had they been there for the whole season, they probably would have been right up there at the top as well. And yeah, that's kind of how it was, very top heavy. With an Aromatisse. So at those top 5, and then there's that huge drop off to Aromatisse, who've been there for the whole season, got brought 6 or 7 times. So it was pretty easy to know what I was going to bring and know what I was going to be doing, especially because I was thinking pretty linearly with this team. Essentially set up Porygon, well, not even set up, start off with Porygon Z and just start clicking Max Strike right off the bat. So I thought about that, and I wanted to have a plan coming to Season 2 that just more than just, oh, this seems good, I'll pick this. So I was looking around and I was playing around, and I decided that the pledge moves looked pretty interesting. I unfortunately did not do my research on them, but we'll get into that. So one of my themes were I wanted to make use of the pledge moves. I wanted to have more concrete speed control, be it through Tailwind or Trick Room or something like that, priority. And I wanted to make sure I filled up my Fire, Water, Grass, and Fairy Dragon Steel cores. As you can see from my team here, my only fire type was Chandelure, who I dropped after week 6 because it was severely underperforming, and that's probably on me. But after I dropped Chandelure, I had nothing. The only other thing on my team that even learned a fire type move was Rhydon with like Fire Punch, and that really sucked. I don't remember which week it was. It was one of these weeks here. I played Casey, and I had him down to just his Escavalier, but it was able to turn it around and knock out the entire rest of my team. It was Escavalier against the world, and just because I couldn't hit it with a fire move, and even if I could hit it with a fire move with Rhydon, that thing has stupidly high defenses, so it's not if I got a drop on Rhydon or if it has an Aqua Berry or anything like that, I was completely unable to break through it. So that's why I wanted to really make sure I had those 2 cores available to me at all times, so I have good type coverage and good type synergy, that kind of thing. And I also wanted to pick Thunderous if it was available. I was originally going to pick Primarina on my first round because I knew it was undervalued as a Tier 2, so I figured it would go pretty quick. So if someone else picked Thunderous, I would have picked Primarina, but nobody did, so I picked Thunderous first round. So looking into the actual Season 2 draft, I was able to fill out my 3 core watts that I needed. Thunderous, all 3 of the pledge move users. I guess there's 4 core watts, huh? So all three of the pledge users, my Fairy Dragon Steel and Fire Water Grass cores, and I was also able to get them on with Tailwind in Latias. So we're going to take a look at each of these individual things and see how they worked out for me. And all of those pieces were supposed to be part of how my team was going to function. So at a high level thing, it was a lot more difficult to make work than I had thought it would be. A lot of the pieces just didn't quite click together, and I couldn't bring everything that I wanted to every week to make my team work. So kind of high level summaries, then we'll break into these more concretely. Thunderous, pretty good. Pledge moves, pretty bad. And in particular, my Fire Water Grass core was not very good, and that's partly due to who I brought. And my Fairy Dragon Steel core was okay. My Fairies and Dragons were good, but my Steel was pretty lacking right there. And even though I picked Tailwind, a lot of my mons were actually really fast to the point where I didn't have anything that could actually take advantage of it, like a Dracovish or anything like that. My only mons that could really take advantage of Tailwind would have been Absol and Aggron, honestly. So let's break down these things and start off with Thunderous. Thunderous, it's a pretty good mon. Super versatile, and I just kind of broke down the stats here to show all the different things it did over the season. So I brought it 11 times, 5 times to Prankster, 5 times Defiant, 6 times Prankster, which I'd imagine for my opponents, it's pretty tough to predict what I'm going to do when it's essentially a 50-50 if it's going to be really, really offensive and you cannot drop its stats, or if it's just going to be a supportive, annoying Pokemon, which it ended up being about 50% of the time. And when you kind of roughly break it down, it was on offense 7 times and supporting 4 times. So it leaned offensively, I mean, as Thunderous tends to do, especially in this season. But it was definitely there for support options. It was able to do a couple different things there. In terms of the items it brought, typically it would be Life Orb, but again, that's just the plurality. It was all over the place, having all sorts of different items that ended up being useful, not useful. I should have recorded which, if it won or lost, depending on which item it was holding. And then just in terms of move pool, Thunderous doesn't really have a deep move pool, but it has enough moves to do what it wants. And so you can see here, 44 different, or I guess it makes sense, 44 moves total. If I brought it 11 times, it has 4 move slots. But these are all the different moves it used. Typically it would have Eerie Impulse, Fly, Protect, and either Thunderbolt or Wild Charge, depending if I was running offensive or special, physical or special. So that's just kind of a brief summary of how flexible Thunderous can be. And in the end, it ended up getting about 0.6 KOs per game, so that's okay. And it ended up having an exactly 50% win rate, which is actually slightly below my team as a whole's win rate. So that's how Thunderous was. Did pretty good. I'm sure in the hands of a better player with a better team, it would have done even better. As for the pledge moves, the pledges are really weird, man. When I looked them up before the season started, I misunderstood them. I thought whatever mon, like, if your first guy uses Grass Pledge, if your second guy's going to do Water Pledge, I thought you would end up using Water Pledge. But I think it's like, for each of the combinations, it does something different. So like if you use the Grass Pledge first and then Water Pledge, Marina ends up using a Grass Pledge, or like a Grass type Grass Pledge instead of a Water Pledge, then it won't get any stab and it just sucks. And there's like weird interactions between all 3 of them. And the effects are not even as good as I'd imagine they'd be. The Swamp is obviously really good. The Fire Storm is pretty nice, but even then it doesn't compare to G-Max Wildfire or any of the Rockfall or not Rockfall, Vocalith and the Blastoise and Venusaur moves. It doesn't even add up to those. We need to take 2 mons, use both of their moves, and hope it doesn't get protected against. Whereas for those other ones, you just use 1 mon, Dynamax it, do a lot of damage, and get even more damage. And it's a lot more independently good. And when you look at how many times I actually brought Water and Grass Pledge, I never even brought Fire Pledge. I only brought them each once, and I never even clicked either of the moves. So that's kind of how the pledge moves suck. They're just not usable. They're so easily stopped by just a double protect turn 1, and then I'm just sad. In terms of the Fire Water Grass core, I'm sure it's a useful core, but I don't think it's as necessary as I thought it would be. And in terms of the defensive synergy it offers, you actually need to have Pokemon that can take hits. Sceptile and Blaziken cannot do that. Primarina can take hits, especially on the special side, or on the special defense side, but it did not have the defensive synergy that I wanted. Primarina was a very good member of my team, probably my MVP, but that wasn't due to the pledge moves or her part of the Fire Water Grass core. Blaziken had some potential on me, but its speed boost is good, but not quite as good when you're encouraging your opponent to use max airstream against you and also get the boost. So you both go up by one stage, but Blaziken's still slower. And Sceptile just it didn't win a single game. You can look at that. Out of the likelihood to win a game, Sceptile never won. The amount of KOs, Sceptile never got a KO. So it would have been good for fling stuff, but as I'll talk about later, my weakness policy users that I tended to pair with Sceptile were not strong enough to get the job done. So overall, this aspect of my team severely underperformed, and I definitely paid the price for it. Moving on to my Fairy Dragon Steel core. I had 2 options for dragons and kind of 2 options for steels, but I really only ever used Aggron. So it's a pretty common archetype you see. I'm not sure how much you see it in VJC. I knew in singles for a while it was pretty useful. They, like fire, water, and grass, have a lot of overlapping synergies. And my tier 1 dragons were pretty good. Primarina was awesome, but I probably should have, instead of having 2 tier 1 dragons, I would have rather had a tier 1 dragon like Solomon's and a tier 1 steel type like, I don't know, maybe. I don't even remember what kind of steel types were in tier 1. Kartana? Heatran, but I should have planned around that better. And when you talk about them individually, you can see here that, well, Aggron's actually lower, but Latias won less than 50% of the time, Aggron less than 50% of the time. But Primarina and Salvus, they're both good. They both won above 60% of the time. And Primarina definitely stood out there at KOs per match, whereas my Solomons tended to be more supportive. This high stat here for Aggron is skewed because I put this in before the quarterfinals game where it showed up and died. And then Latias was typically a more support mon, so that makes sense right there. But it just didn't quite creep over the 50% win rate to be what I consider really a good mon. And part of that with Latias is that I kept, despite it having the lowest average total, well, I guess besides something, having the lowest average total KOs here, I kept trying to use it as a weakness policy sweeper, and it just didn't have the firepower to get it there. I tried mixed Latias, I tried only special Latias, and it just came up short every time. And it's just so much better of a support mon. Tailwind, Helping Hand, Icy Wind, all that stuff. When I brought support Latias, it won a lot more than it did when I brought an offensive Latias. Another kind of aspect of my team that I talked about a little bit earlier was my speed tiers. I specifically wanted to get Tailwind so I could have the speed advantage on my opponents, and then I proceeded to draft very fast Pokemon that didn't need Tailwind anyways. So I ended up kind of not focusing on speed control as much as I probably should have, because I figured I'd usually be going first. So that's nice on the first turn, but once your opponent starts doing Trick Room or putting up their Tailwind or Icy Winding my guys, then it's totally throws my strategy out the window when I can't go first like I want to. And it was really easy to get out of position and then have a very hard time getting back into it. And like I mentioned this a couple times throughout the season, my team sucks against Trick Room. I don't have anything that's good in it. The Blade, maybe. Well, we saw in the quarterfinals that didn't even work. My only way to set it and pretty much stop it was Mr. Rhyme. And yeah, it was just not a very good, not a very well-built team to deal with multiple team styles. And like I said earlier, really, I guess Primarina does benefit from Tailwind as well, alongside Aggron. What's up next? And then I had some transactions. 2 serious and 2 meme transactions. Originally, I had drafted Hippopotas for some semblance of weather control, because I knew Daddy had the rain team, a couple people had sun, someone else had a couple different hail setters. And I wanted to draft Hippopotas because I thought it would be nice to have a way to just kind of change the weather whenever I wanted. But when you think about it, the ground type loses to water, it loses to sun teams because they have grass types, and it loses to ice under hail. So I could bring my guy, change the weather, and then have it die, and then have them set the weather back up. So after thinking about that, I decided to swap it out for Duskull because I wanted a couple more support options. Trick Room, Haze, Ally Switch, oops, what the fuck? And Imprison. I was really on board the Imprison Trick Room train, but the more I think about it, that's not really the best way to go about dealing with Trick Room. And then I ended up switching out Sceptile for Morgrim I wanted more fake out support, and I wanted another prankster. Having prankster screens and fake tears and trick. I never used trick, but it has a lot of options. It's essentially a baby Grim Snarl. Hold up, what the fuck is going on with my music, man? Let's put that outside. Let's restart that. Yeah, so Morgrim is baby Grim Snarl without the offense, and it did okay. It definitely kind of got hurt in the later games when I made these transactions and got a Tapu Lele instead of Latias, and my Psychic Terrain stopped my own prankster guys. And then I also switched out Settlements for Regidrago, which that was pretty fun. I would do that again. I did that because I thought I was out, so I wanted to have fun in the last game. And then I had to go into the playoffs with a team that was significantly worse. I'm not sure significantly worse. It was pretty bad to begin with, but these two don't really have synergy with each other or the rest of my team. They were just fun damage dealers, and I really just wanted to click Dragon Energy with this guy, so I brought Psychic Terrain to prevent the fake out. So that was my team. Now we can look at my various stats from the season, and we can see here that I did not end up succeeding in my goal to have a core of mons that I don't have to bring every single week. I ended up bringing Thunderous every single game, or not every game, but every week. Latias almost every time. Primarina, Mr. Rhyme, Salamence, and it's just, again, kind of that. It's less of a Pareto distribution than last time. It's more evenly distributed, but still, there are these guys down here that are never seen. And I mean, that's the natural distribution of things, so that's to be expected. But still, I would like this to be a little even less steep than this. And then this is a pretty interesting stat. I like these. I like looking at these. This is the odds that a certain mon's going to Dynamax in a given situation. So overall, you see here on my team, the width of the bars is based on their frequency that they showed up. And then the red is the odds that they don't Dynamax, and blue is the odds that they do. So you can see from here, just barely, Thunderous squeaks out to be number 1 in terms of most frequently Dynamaxed. Then Latias, and is that Aggron? Yeah, then everybody else is just kind of flex options here and there. And those are kind of not really unexpected. I mean, you're never going to max a Duskull or Morgrim or Mr. Rhyme. I mean, maybe you could. Maybe that would have won me some games, but who knows? Just interesting stuff to look at. Then we have my total teams, KOs per game, and the percent of games won. I do it this way instead of doing total KOs to show, so it doesn't get skewed as much by which ones get brought a lot, which ones don't. But then it does get skewed by guys who show up once and get a couple kills, like Regidrago and Tapu Lele here. But the real one to look at right here is Primarina, who came to a lot of games and still got almost a kill and a half on average, which is very, very good for, especially for a tier 2 that is going to be tier 1 again, because it probably deserves to be tier 1. Here we have the likelihood that a given Pokemon is going to win the game. If it's above this dotted line, that's essentially good. If it's below that, it's essentially bad. Again, this is skewed by Regidrago, Tapu Lele, and Duskull coming only a couple times. I think once for Duskull and twice for these two, actually. But if you screen out those, the whole team on average is like slightly above 50%. Like it's like 50.1% of games that I won. Just about as average as you could be. Here we have the BFF stats. So you can see Thunderous it's kind of a two-way tie. We have Thunderous and Latias and Thunderous and Primarina. Makes sense because those were all my three most brought mons. Yeah, so naturally they're going to show up in the most times in combination with each other. So that just kind of goes to show my team didn't have like a specific core that always came together like a Torkoal Venusaur or a Indeedee Hat kind of thing. So pretty evenly distributed, and definitely based on how frequently they came. Overall, I think it's pretty safe to say that Primarina ended up being my MVP. And you can kind of look at this on this chart here. So this is the the win percentage of that mon divided by the win percentage of my team, plotted against how often I brought that mon. So ideally, the best Pokemon you could have would be out here somewhere a little above the line, because as you go out across the x-axis, you're going to get closer and closer to the baseline, because it's going to be determined by this mon more so than these ones. But ideally, like a mon out here would be the best place to be. But my mon that's above the line that has the greatest number of Enbra is Primarina. meaning that it definitely overperformed despite coming a lot, so it's not due to a low sample size kind of thing. It truly was the best Pokemon on my team, so I have bestowed upon her the MVP medal. Yeah, so with all that kind of said and done, let's talk about some conclusions that I drew from this season. Thunderous is good, flexibility is good, and being able to have a Pokemon where you can't predict what it's going to do every single week is very, very nice. And what I say here in a single interaction, if I Thunderous attacks once, you still can't really tell what it's going to do. It might be Prankster, it might not be. If it's physical, that doesn't even necessarily mean it's Defiant. I brought physical Prankster Thunderous once, and it's nice to make them have to work to figure out what it's going to do and what it's capable of. Pledges do suck. I still stand by that. I will always stand by that after the season. And I put a little bit too much focus on trying to get my 3-type cores and making sure that I had them. Everything was by the book, and then I had Fire, Water, Grass, Fairy, Dragon, Steel. I had my Tailwind support. I had that stuff, but I didn't really look at the interactions and make sure I had enough synergy or the bulk to back my things up. I drafted a lot of frail Pokemon that couldn't really survive taking a hit, and even given that, they weren't even glass cannons really. They were just kind of frail and couldn't quite get the chaos they need either. So that's kind of the season in a nutshell. Here's a little preview of what next season. This is going to be my strategy. So have fun thinking about what that cryptic image means, and I will see you in the next one.